Greetings, chummers, and welcome back to Normal Guy Games. This time we're going to have a look at an RPG that I've been playing ever since the first edition. It's very near and dear to my heart. I don't get it to the table as much as I'd like, but if you are looking for a cyberpunk fantasy type setting in RPG format and you're looking for something a little bit different to run, I have what you need. We're going to look at Shadowrun 6th edition. So, Shadowrun 6th edition brings some changes to the game that I think are worthy of talking about. Now, the game has received some hate from people mostly that are used to the older versions of the game. And keeping in mind, I started with 1st edition and I moved my way up. So before we look at the 6th edition, let's look at where it came from before. Let's look at some historical data. So if we take a trip down memory lane, Shadowrun has always been a beloved series. It blends the high-tech world of cyberpunk with the ancient and mystical magic arts, right? So it is a game where you can play just as quickly a human that is a street samurai, which is, you know, how one of the characters is classified, someone that's a runner gunner type of deal, all the way down to someone that's a street mage or a shaman, or, you know, there are so many different things that you can do in Shadowrun. So the previous editions, as time went on, they got more and more complex, and a lot of people stick with 3rd edition, right? That's kind of the popular edition. 4th was okay. 5th was kind of a bloat. It was a struggle for me to run 5th edition because I was the only one that was familiar with Shadowrun. So if you look at it that way, 6th edition brings something to the table that I think some RPGs need. And what it's bringing to the table mostly is taking those rules and pulling it back a little bit, right? Just to kind of simplify things. And there are some people that would say, oh, it's dumbing it down. They changed the way edges work. They changed this, they changed that. Well, that's the point of a new edition. And sometimes new editions are not for everybody. So first and foremost, character creation has received an overhaul. We are still working with the original priority system, at least in the core. If you buy the character options book, the Shadowrun Companion, there are actually other ways of creating characters within that book itself. Now, I personally prefer the priority system because it gives you a good solid baseline on how you want to structure your characters. So the basics of your races haven't changed. You still have dwarves, elves, orcs, trolls, and baseline humans. So that part is the same as what you will recognize. And in some of the companion books, they do offer other options for customizing your races, like, for instance, an Oni for the orcs, and different types of different meta types for elves and for dwarves and whatnot. But those are in the supplemental books, and we're just going to kind of focus on the core for this. So every one of your characters is going to have a role, whether that's your arcane specialist or the face, which is kind of the charismatic one of the group, the bard, if you will, if you're familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, all the way to street samurais and even tech specialists such as deckers and riggers and technomancers and things like that. Now, each of these characters has their own specialty and their own thing they do. Obviously, if you're a street samurai, you're going to be the running, gunning, tough kind of warrior type archetype. Your arcane specialist can be like a wizard or sorcerer, or even sort of like a cleric, depending on how you build the character. Really, the sky's the limit, and everything is kind of open, right? So you could, if you wanted to, have a mage that is a sniper with a long rifle. That is doable. That's something you can do. A lot of what you do in Shadowrun is you assign your own skills, you assign your attributes, you build your character the way you want your character to be. And the only restrictions on that are the actual core rules themselves, where you have to assign your priorities and kind of figure out how you want your attributes to be spent and whatnot. But other than that, you can actually customize your character very highly. And that's something that my players and myself as a game master / dungeon master, that's something that I like. I like the ability to customize your character and kind of do what you want with it. So your priorities will be set between A and E, and that's split between your meta type, which is your race, your attributes, your skills, magic or resonance, depending on if you are a mage or a someone like a technomancer, for instance, and then your resources. And the letter that you assign to that denotes how powerful or how strong that is. So if you want to place emphasis on magic, then you could put your magic at A or B, and that would make your magic your most powerful aspect of your person, of your runner, of your character. Conversely, you could assign your meta type or your race to A, and that would give you access to dwarves, orcs, and trolls. And well, the thing is, you could pick any race at that point, but the depending on how you assign your meta type depends on sometimes how many attribute points that you get to spend. Once you get that all hammered down, you're basically going to assign your resources, spending the money. You're going to select qualities, and then you'll go on to buying your gear and or spending your customization karma. Now, one big thing that is a difference between this and a game like Dungeons and Dragons, instead of getting experience or XP, you get karma. So for every session, you get a minimum amount of karma, and then if you if you finish runs or you do something in game that warrants extra karma, then you will be awarded extra karma points that you can then spend to buy more abilities and or ability scores, skills, spells, and all of that stuff. You can spend that karma to customize your character. And you can do that immediately. You don't have to wait until you level up from 9 to 10 or 2 to 3. If you have karma to spend and you have enough to buy what you want, you can spend that karma immediately, depending on the game master's discretion. Now, one of the things that changed from previous editions is the way Edge works. Now, in the current edition, Edge is actually sort of like a currency that you earn and spend as you play the game and as you go through social encounters and or combat encounters and things of that nature. So you start off with 7 edge, and you can spend that and earn more as you go along. Now, the thing about edge is there are several ways that you can use it to boost the situation. And as opposed to previous editions, basically your edge, like I said in the beginning, is kind of like a currency. So once you want to spend a little bit of edge, you allocate it and you use it. And you can only use it once per turn, keeping that in mind. But you can use the same ability over and over, or the same edge ability, as many times as you want from round to round to round. You can only just use edge once per turn. Now, your edge boosts go from a cost of 1 to 5, or in some cases even more. Now, the thing is, what you're going to do is you're going to allocate and spend edge points as you see fit, depending on the situation. And one of the things you can do is, besides doing things like re-rolling a die, adding pluses, or even granting edge to some of your fellow team members, what you can do are edge actions. Some of those actions include making a big speech or making a called shot to someone's vitals. There are lots of things that you can do and lots of ways that you can spend edge. And I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of the time, and this is just me speaking from the point of view of someone who has been with Shadowrun since the first edition, sometimes we can get hung up on the old things and the nostalgia and the things we like. And keeping in mind, for instance, I grew up with Dungeons and Dragons first edition, I played 1st, 2nd, 3rd, a little bit of 4th, and 5th. Of those editions, obviously, I have the fondest memories of 2nd edition, right? So and that's just me. I have the fondest memories of 2nd and 3rd edition. 1st edition I played a little bit. It's what I started with. And 4th edition was interesting. It was more to me, the way I thought of 4th edition D&D is that it was kind of like a skirmish game almost. But it's the same thing with Shadowrun. So each of these editions have something that they have brought to the table. And a lot of the time, I think people get caught up on that. They get caught up on that edition that they grew up with or they started playing with. In my particular opinion, the changes to Shadowrun have actually kind of brought something more to the table in the form of making it simpler for people to approach without dumbing it down too much. So you have a character now. How do you play? I'm glad you asked. So when you're playing Shadowrun, a lot of the time what you're going to be using is a skill plus an attribute and then any modifiers for the situation, and then you will roll that in the form of D6s. Now, there will be times when you are grabbing, throwing handfuls of D6s, and anything that is a 5 or a 6 is a success. Some tests will have a threshold, and that would be the number of successes that you need to actually successfully, accomplish that task. Now, when you're making tests, there are other things that you can do. There are teamwork tests. There are teamwork tests for initiative. There's a thing called buying hits where you allocate 4 dice per hit, and that takes away the rolling aspect. So if you're doing something fairly simple, it's kind of like taking your time, or in some previous editions of Dungeons and Dragons, for instance, taking 10. Also, when making tests, you can try again, but it does impose a negative 2 dice penalty to your next roll. Now this, of course, is kind of just a general overview of the basic nuanced details of just the core test of Shadowrun, the core mechanic, and that would be rolling dice pools. And you build your pool, you roll your pool, you're good. You count your successes. Now in the book, if you wish to make a character or play Shadowrun without making a character, you can do this easier by selecting an archetype. So in the book and also in the starter set, and I do own both, it gives you an example of a couple of archetypes each. So the core book has a few, and the beginner's box also has a couple in there. And what that does is it gives you a baseline framework for an adept, a combat mage, a covert ops specialist, a rigger, a street samurai. It gives you a pre-built character for these things that will get you into the game quicker. And this is something that some players are more comfortable with, to have something that has already been pre-built that they can just write down on a character sheet and just roll with. And that's fine as well. I like the fact that they provide those sample characters. It makes it easier. So all of this is great. But what exactly is Shadowrun at its core? So in 6th edition, the year is 2080, and at some point during the past, there was an event that caused what was called goblinization. And what that means is there were people that turned into these different metatypes like elves and dwarves and whatnot. And then later on, there were people that were born as those metatypes. And the thing is, this is a very that was a defining attribute of Shadowrun, but there are also other events that happen, such as the collapse of the Matrix a couple of times, the near collapse of the collapse of several governments, and almost the collapse of civilization at one point. So there are a lot of different things in the history of Shadowrun that kind of define what you are. So at the point of the start of the game, governments are not necessarily as in charge as you would think. It's more that megacorporations are. And megacorporations are kind of their own like sovereign nation within different territories. And these mega corporations compete, and they vie for dominance on the basically kind of a global council kind of a thing to basically, there's the big 10, which are the 10 most influential and most powerful mega corporations, and those seats change quite frequently. At the point where you start Shadowrun, you are a runner, a runner in the shadows, pretty much, and that is where Shadowrun comes in. The terminology Shadowrun. So when you're making a run, it's kind of like a mission, or in D&D terms, a quest. It's something that you have to accomplish. And to do that, you're going to need a team of highly skilled operatives that can fill in different roles. So it's always good to have kind of a plethora of different characters that can run with you. So from the neon lit streets of the futuristic cities to the dark underbelly of the world itself, there are a lot of things that 6th edition captures, and that Shadowrun has actually captured. Shadowrun was at its when it was first created, it was very unique. It was something that was out of the norm. It was something that was very different to everything that we'd seen before, right? Because we had seen cyberpunk RPGs, and we'd seen fantasy RPGs and even sci-fi RPGs, but nothing had really meshed all of those different things together as well as Shadowrun did. So why would you give Shadowrun 6th edition even a second glance? It is a combination, a blend of cyberpunk and fantasy. It is a captivating experience like no other, with refined rules, refined character creation, a more simplified system. Honestly, and of course, we have to mention the immersive setting. All of these things are reasons why you should definitely try Shadowrun. And even though there are a lot of the old school players out there that are not quite as fond of Shadowrun as, or of 6th edition as they were of, say, 3rd edition, 4th edition, or 5th edition, 6th edition is more accessible. It's what's out now. It's what's available now. It's simplified. It's streamlined. And it works. So if you're looking for something new, something different from Dungeons & Dragons, this is it. This is future, this is cyberpunk, this is sci-fi, this is fantasy, this is all of those things rolled into one dystopian package of complete corporate nightmare. And you will enjoy yourself, I guarantee, if you just give it a chance. The 6th edition of Shadowrun is an amazing game. So remember, fellow runners, the shadows await. Gather your team and enter a world of cutthroat, backstabbing, corporate espionage. Give it a try. I recommend you give Shadowrun 6th edition at least a glance. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next video.